Woo! Ha ha! Woohoo! Oh, that was a good entrance, wasn't it? Be afraid, audience, for I will be about to review Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. And I should warn you, it's going to hurt. Also, it's pretty long, so sorry in advance. Let's begin. Mr. Nicholas Payne, the Doctor Who fan base is in a state of temporal flux at the moment. We need your assistance. We need your help to bring balance to this fan base, which has gone off the fucking rails. It's not the only one, but it's gone off the rails. So we need people like you to put it back on the track, if you understand my meaning. We need your help. Urgently. What must I do, Master? You must re-review the Doctor Who Series 12 or Season 38 finale, Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. Thank you, Master. I shall get onto it right away. Good. And it seems not a moment too soon. I'll leave you to it. Well then. Right then. Let's fucking do this. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Nick here and welcome to my revisitation review of Doctor Who Series 12 Episodes 9 and 10 Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. This is the big one, folks. Okay, so where to fucking begin with this story? Not with the big continuity changing revelation, that's for later. I know that's probably what you guys have all come to see, but I'm gonna have to wait a bit longer. Let's start with the plot. The plot of Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children sees the Doctor, Ryan, Yaz and Graham, after the events of the Haunting of Villa Diodati, trying to find Ashad, the lone Cyberman, and try to prevent the Cybermen from destroying humanity in the far future. So they try to help out this one group of survivors left and try to defend them from the Cybermen. 3 of the 7 humans die, but the other 4 escape. 3 of them are joined by Yaz and Graham, and 1 accompanies the Doctor and Ryan, who steal a Cyberman ship, and both head off to try and find Ko-Sharmas and the Frontier and the Boundary, where they can escape into another universe. Ashad and 2 fellow Cybermen attempt to try and hunt them all down, as well as complete their objective in restoring the cyber race and destroying humanity. The Cybermen also plan to erase all organic life from the Cybermen, which would essentially make them robots, which a character points out later on. They just become robots. They lose all the organic stuff, but they become robots, which does sound like a very dumb plan. The Cyberium wants to cause all of the Cybermen to become robots, as opposed to, well, Cybermen. Yeah, the fact that it's an AI, a living AI system, is a bit of a what's the opposite to benefit? De-benefit to the Cyberman cause, because it's basically thinking, let's remove all the organic life, when the whole point of the Cybermen is adding metal and robotic stuff to organic life to make them cyborgs. That's the whole point. So the Cyberium is being a bit silly, let's say. Thankfully, it is called out in the actual episode by a character who we'll get onto in a bit. So Ashad also has this bomb, a particle bomb, inside his chest, which was created by the Cyberium to eradicate all organic life. And when Ashad finds the warrior Cybermen, I think he's trying to purge the organic life from them initially. At least I think that's what he does. And then they go on the march afterwards. So that's basically the plot of Ascension of the Cybermen. Oh, and yeah, there's something about the Timeless Child and the Master and Gallifrey and the Matrix. There's also something about this Brendan guy, but they're not important. Okay, one of them's important for later, but we'll get onto it. But the other one, not really that important, really. Right, let's start with Ascension of the Cybermen. In my opinion, Ascension of the Cybermen is a very good start to this two-parter. It's a very good first episode. It's not perfect. There is its problems, like there's too much people saying the obvious thing, and the episode doesn't really have a kind of end goal. The characters are trying to make for the Frontier and Koshamas, whilst the Cybermen are trying to revive the Cybermen, but there isn't really an end goal for the end of part 1 before moving into part 2. There isn't even that many big revelations as well. The biggest revelation is Koshamas turning out to be a person, and the boundary going across to Gallifrey, but we're not really building to that as much. We're just trying to find them. Same for the Cybermen, they're just trying to restart their army, but there isn't really a end goal, so to speak, for end of episode 1. More so it's an end goal for the story overall, for this take of the story. Mr. TARDIS, in his review of Ascension of the Cybermen, talks about this, how usually part 1s of a new series story, if it's a 2-parter or 3-parter, would have, even before the end of episode 1, they will have even the end of the first half, they will have something to go for, and then that something is resolved at the end or something is revealed, which leads to some revelations or some answers being asked at the end of the first episode before we then jump into the big events of the second episode. Let's take Army of Ghosts from Series 2, for example. In Army of Ghosts, the whole premise of that episode is, where are these ghosts coming from and who is controlling them? We find out that it's Torchwood who's controlling them, but we find out that they are coming from a parallel Earth, and they are indeed Cybermen. Another Cyberman 2-part series finale. What are the odds? As well as, what is this big spear thing inside Torchwood, and what or who is inside of it? At the end of that story, it's revealed that the Cult of Skaro, aka a group of Daleks, are inside that spear. And by the end of the episode, you get 5 million, I think it was, Cybermen crossing from the parallel world to Earth, and the Daleks arriving from their spears. So we got basically the main end goal of episode 12 of series 2 was to find out the mystery of these ghosts and the spear. By the end of episode 12, we've got those answers. We can now move into episode 13, where it's the epic Dalek versus Cyberman battle, and other characters from the parallel universe trying to cross over, plus the end of the Doctor-Rose relationship story that's been going across the series. So that's how Series 2 managed to do it. Series 12, on the other hand, there isn't really much of an end goal for Ascension of the Cybermen. Characters are just trying to get to one place. Some of them do, but there isn't really much of a overarching thing for this story, trying to find out what's trying to get some revelations or some mysteries answered. A lot of that will be done in the next episode, but not so much here. And no, the episode doesn't need to have one specific thing or a couple of specific things to be answered by the end of this episode. It doesn't have to do that. It can just build up, have a cliffhanger, and you have to wait till next week to find out what happens. But with Ascension of the Cybermen, there isn't really much of an end goal for the story, apart from getting to the boundary. But even then, once they get to the boundary, what do we do then? Cross over into the other universe? What are we going to do then? I think what the main problem with Ascension of the Cybermen is that we just keep cutting away to this Brendan stuff, which is set in Ireland sometime in the 20th century, and we're just cutting to these random scenes featuring this guy called Brendan from when he's found as a baby by this kindly farmer and adopted by him and his wife, to growing up and retiring from after being a GAR police officer for several years. It just feels out of place. We're cutting back and forth between those scenes with no explanation. It just feels completely out of place. And even when we get some sort of an explanation in the next episode, it still feels awkward, and the reasoning why we were seeing it in this episode makes no sense, or very little sense, at least presented in the context of this episode. In The Timeless Child, it's revealed that a certain character shows another certain character these visions. They're drip-feeding them through, but until they reveal that in the next episode, we don't know what's going on with these things. We're just randomly cutting to scenes set in 1920s Ireland, featuring this guy, Brendan. And apparently another character is also having these plugged into their brain. They're witnessing those whilst the story is playing out. But that's not really shown or explained on screen in this episode. It's just, oh yeah, I was showing you these visions, but you didn't make any indication at the time that you were witnessing them. That's lazy writing. I'm sorry, but it's lazy writing. However, the rest of Ascension of the Cybermen, despite not really having a main end goal, is a pretty entertaining story, as we're seeing the two groups trying to outrun the Cybermen and trying to survive, with the Cybermen trying to build up their army again, remove the organic pieces, which is a bit of a dumb idea for the Cybermen. No, scratch that, it's an extremely dumb idea. But it's still an interesting way to see how these are building up. The supporting characters are good, I suppose. I can't remember all of their names, but Ravio is the main leader of the group. Graham and Yazar, and Ethan's the one that tags along with the Doctor and Ryan, as well as Ko-Shama's when they meet him. There's also another two with Ryan and Graham and Yaz. Gotta keep remembering that. And honestly, they're okay. They're pretty good characters. Not amazing or anything. They're pretty good. I do have an issue with one of the other two, with Graham and Yaz. There's a guy and a girl alongside the other lady. The other young female survivor, not Ravio, this other lady. She dies at the very start of the Timeless Children. I think that death should have been at the end of Ascension of the Cybermen. We should have the Cybermen coming through. She's trying to defend the others. She gets shot whilst doing so, and that's our cliffhanger for their story. Or we don't kill her off straight away in Timeless Children. We wait a few more minutes, wait until, say, quarter of the episode in, and then have her killed off. But as it stands, she's killed off a minute or so into the episode. As it starts, maybe even less than a minute. It's not a, automatic death like a Cyberman shoots her and that's it. That's the first thing that happens to her in the episode. No, she does get out the gun and try to defend the others, but it's a few seconds later where she gets shot and killed. That should have been at the end of Ascension of the Cybermen, not the start of the Timeless Children. So I think that was they misplaced that death, or she should have stuck around for a little bit longer before being killed. And that's saying a lot, considering this episode has quite a few supporting characters. Thankfully, 3 of them are not in this episode very much. The 3 that die at the start. Although, apparently, an explosion causing you to do a flip and crash onto the ground can now apparently kill you. And again, the valet was just thrown to the ground by a Cyberman in the previous episode, and he died. Maybe he broke his bones were broken. Maybe his neck was broken by that. But these guys just... An explosion causing you to go into the air for a second or two and then onto the ground killed you, I guess. Was it such a big explosion that it caused them to break their bones when they crash-landed back onto Earth? And similarly, the other survivor is sort of shot by the Cybermen, but there's some stuff in the way, so it would have blocked the blast going towards him for the most part. I think he would still be alive, or the stuff would fall on top of him, and that would squash him, and that could kill him. But as we see in this episode, the humans in these stories are just killed. They're pussies, basically. At least the one who died at the start of the Timeless Children, as I mentioned, should have been at the end of Ascension of the Cybermen. They at least get shots, dead-on shots by a Cyberman laser. At least that's a plausible cause of death. The other ones are just pussies. Plot-wise, I don't really have much more to talk about with Ascension of the Cybermen, but it is a pretty good build-up plot. It's just that there isn't really much of an end goal for some of our characters. Characters are just trying to run away from the Cybermen, and that's more or less the plot of most of the episode once they escape the planet where they try to fight them off with the equipment. The supporting characters, as I mentioned, are pretty good. The main characters are actually really great in this episode. Graham and Yaz have some great scenes together, just like in Praxis. And Ryan and the Doctor work off with each other pretty well as well, like we saw in Demons of the Punjab. And they work off with the supporting characters very well in the story. There's also some good humour here and there. And also the performances are very good as well. In fact, the performances are very good across the board. Overall, Ascension of the Cybermen, as an individual episode, is flawed, but it's still a pretty good episode. If I was talking about all these episodes individually, this one would probably top Can You Hear Me? Just for the fact that Can You Hear Me had potential, but it kind of wasted it a little bit. Ascension of the Cybermen is flawed, but it's going in the right directions for the most part. More or less, even though I complained about not having much of an end goal, it's still at least heading in that in the it's still at least heading in the right direction, though the Brendan stuff could easily have been cut and you would have lost nothing from either this episode or the story as a whole. So, speaking about the story as a whole, let's start moving on to part 2. The Timeless Child, the most controversial episode of the entire show as of time of recording this video. Although it's not the only story that's had controversy for big lore canon changes over, well, the entire near 60-year run of the show. But it's probably the one that's got the most diverse and most controversial reception, and at time recording it is the most controversial story. Well, to be honest, it's the second to latest episode. Before I go plot-wise, I will mention that Jamie Magnus Stone does a really great job in directing this episode, and the visuals look really great, and there's some great cinematography and editing for the majority of these episodes, specifically more so in part 1. Apart from when it cuts to the Brendan stuff, that's just that just feels like it's being inserted into the story, as mentioned, without much of a explanation, at least within the context of Ascension. Also some brilliant music by Sega Nakanola, including a brilliant new Cyberman theme. I'm not sure whether he's developed a new theme for the Daleks or the Master, but the new Cyberman theme, whilst not as good as the Marigold theme from Series 2 or the March of the Cybermen theme from the Earthshock, it's still a really great theme and works really nicely with the metallic, industrial Cybermen in this story. It's really great and also builds up the tension really well as when the Cybermen are on the attack. It works pretty effectively. And I look forward to hearing this track again in a future Cyberman story or stories should they come back. I'm not expecting them to come back in Series 13, but maybe Series 14? We've got a whole new design, which is probably the best design of the new series, as it's a nice mixture of classic series Cyberman with the face. It's a very Earthshock, no, not Earthshock. It's a very the Invasion style face, but the bodies aren't too dissimilar to a Nightmare in Silver Cyberman, for example. It's a pretty good mixture of classic and new series melded together, and it looks really good. In fact, it actually looks quite a lot like the real-time Cybermen from the webcast Real Time. It looks pretty great, and it's probably my favourite of the new series Cybermen designs so far. So far, we've only had 2 episodes, one story with them, but as it's a brand new design, we might be expecting more future stories with them, maybe? Speaking of Cyberman designs, Ashad sort of looks like he's a Nightmare in Silver design Cyberman, but with bits coming across, and there seems to be a bit of 10th Planet in there as well. And then we've got mixtures of different versions of the 2006 Cybermen. We've got the ones without the C on their chest, which is a bit like in Series 6. We've got some versions that do have the C on their chest, which are the Parallel Earth ones. And then there's some other versions that don't include that. Maybe even the light. They might even have a light like the Nightmare in Silver ones. But there's a couple of different versions based on the 2006-2011 designs. In fact, these 2 episodes, specifically Ascension, are very good. Try to spot the different type of Cyberman designs type of episode. The more obscure ones are more like an Easter egg. Okay, on to the Timeless Child, but first the cliffhanger. The cliffhanger sees the Master coming back through the boundary, and it's revealed that the boundary was the other side of the boundary was Gallifrey, and he takes the Doctor to Gallifrey to show her what he discovered in the Matrix. Great timing, Master? Were you just waiting for the Doctor to turn up at this point? Somewhere down the line, you're just waiting for the Doctor to turn up here so that you could take her to the Matrix. He does sort of have the plan to bring the Cybermen to Gallifrey so that they can use the use the Cyberium to turn the bodies of the dead Time Lords into Cybermasters. So we get another Cyberman design in this episode, and these Cybermasters will have the power to regenerate. So they, even if they get shot, they can regenerate and come back and be, well, invincible. That's actually a pretty good plan. That does make the Cybermen invincible, and it retains their organic side as well as the technological. It's actually a pretty good idea. It's a bit insultive to the Time Lords, but it's a pretty good idea for the Cybermen. So, yeah, the Master is better at coming up at plans than a AI. Well, of course he is. It's the fucking Master. Of course he's going to be smarter than the Cyberium. It's the Master. You're expecting something else? Meanwhile, Ryan, Toko Shamus, and Ethan have to fend off a Cyberman attack, who the Master has said, oh, don't forget to attack these humans on the planet just before you cross the boundary. And whilst that's all going on, Graham, Yaz, Rizzo, Ravio, and one of the other two survivors who didn't get killed at the start of the episode attempt to try and hide from the Cybermen by being inside the cyber suits, and then come down to the planet to help Ryan, Ethan, and Co-Shamas before they all cross the boundary to Gallifrey. And I'll quickly wrap up the Cyberman plot in this episode. The fight against the Cybermen on the planet is really good. Even if there's not a huge amount going on, we could have done with a bit more fighting, but to be honest, as it's just 3 characters a lot against a lot of Cybermen, that makes a lot of sense. Thankfully, the other characters come down to help put an end to the fight, and they all team up to then go across the boundary. Also, Ryan's story arc of this series comes to an end. He's able to throw a bomb in the shape of a basketball at a target, and it blows up a group of Cybermen. Yay! Well done, Ryan. Yeah, because the basketball thing was from the start of Spyfall Part 1, and yeah, that somehow is a story arc now. Ryan's now good at basketball. It's not like we saw him practice or anything throughout the series, or even mention it to anybody else. Character arc fulfilled? No, it's not a very good character arc if it's just throwing a basketball into the hoop, and then it just doesn't become relevant again until later on. In Spyfall Part 1, it was relevant to Ryan's dyspraxia, as little of that has been explained over the series. Anyway, so the companions and the supporting characters stop the Cybermen. Some pretty epic scenes, but ultimately it's over a bit too quickly, and that's mainly due to the fact that there's 2 other plots going on at the same time. One of the other plots is that the Master, whilst he's got the Doctor trapped in the Matrix, more on that in a moment, is that he's he talks to Ashad and then kills Ashad after finding out about the particle bomb, so that he can have the Cyberium going to him and then go off to do his plan with the Cybermasters. And while all of that is going on, the Master traps the Doctor in the Matrix, and a projection version of him, his consciousness as he puts it, gives her as many people have put it, PowerPoint presentation of the true history of the Time Lords. And here we go, people. This is the big continuity changing thing that a lot of people did not like, including myself to a degree. And I'll explain in a moment. So the Master reveals that once upon a time, Gallifrey was just this ordinary backwater planet inhabited by a race called the Shobogans, which is a name given to the Time Lords on the planet outside of the Citadel in the classic series. So a Shobogan called Tecteun, a scientist and explorer, goes out to explore the universe, and one day she finds a child being at the bottom, and one day she finds a child beside a portal to another universe, seemingly abandoned. So Tecteun adopts the child, they go exploring, and then they go back to Gallifrey, where she does some experiments and tests on the child. One day the child accidentally falls off a cliff, and I have to say I'm sorry for the kid actor who played the Timeless Child, but the expression they give when falling off that cliff does not signify the correct expression of, I'm falling down off a cliff, I'm falling to my certain doom. The expression is just like, oh, right, I'm just got to stand in front of this green screen waving my arms around. I don't want to bash on the kid too much, but the whole presentation of that was a bit odd. And I'd maybe blame the director a little bit, just giving the kid the wrong directions. Like, you've got to actually show shock or fear. No, what we get is just blank. At least when we had something similar with Brendan in the previous episode, the actor playing Brendan at least had some sort of a surprised expression on his face, which connected with what was going on in the story. Here, it's just a blank face, really, from the kid, and I don't blame them completely. But come on, kid, you're falling off a cliff to your almost certain doom. Show some emotion. And director, make them show that emotion. If I was directing this, I would ask them to try and show a shocked or sad or scared face to show that what they are thinking before they crash onto the ground and supposedly die. Except the Timeless Child doesn't die, but they wouldn't have known that when they were falling to their deaths, so the correct expression is important. Oh, look at me, I'm criticising something more filmmaking side than plot-driven side. And that's the whole point of a bloody review. You've got to talk about plot and execution. Otherwise, what's the fucking point? Now, if you're just doing your opinions, then it can be one or the other. But when you're doing a critical review, you've got to do as much as overall as possible. Anyway, so the Timeless Child is able to regenerate and doesn't seem to have a limit on regeneration. So Tae-Yoon attempts to find out the secret of regeneration and splice it into Shobogen biology, which she does so and is able to regenerate, much like the child who's gone through a couple of regenerations. And she, and alongside two other Time Lords, who turn out to be Rassilon and Omega according to the Series 12 scripts, which they should have been anyway because Rassilon and Omega were the initial two founding fathers of Gallifrey, released in the TV series. And expanded media, there's apparently a third one, and it appears that Tae-Yoon is taking that third one's place for this episode. Anyway, so basically the whole stuff with the regeneration and the Time Lords building Time Lord Society, based around being able to regenerate 12 times, 13 lives, as they put a cap on it. And then the stuff about Rassilon and Omega, as we've heard about before. And then ultimately that builds up Time Lord Society. Now, I'm going to put the brakes on the describing what's going on at the moment to say that actually this does kind of work in the context of the Time Lords. The Time Lords can go out and steal other species' ideas and pass them off as their own. Samuel Davis, in one of his Broke Canon videos, talked about this. It was mostly about nursery rhymes and most of their stories, but the Time Lords can go out and steal other myths and legends about other things outside of the universe and incorporate it into their own mythology and their own lore. So it makes a lot of sense that the Time Lords stole regeneration from this unknown being, and they just developed it and they claimed that they had it all along. That is so Time Lord-like. That is so Time Lord. The pomposity of these people will actually do this. And it's also so in character of the Time Lords to just cover it all up. And that's where the whole Matrix stuff comes along, and they just cover the entire thing up until the Master discovers it. But that's not what pushes him over the edge for killing the Time Lords. I mean, he's probably upset that they lied, but it's the Time Lords, they do that. No, there's something that pushes him over the edge that makes him destroy Gallifrey, or at the very least killing all its people and just destroying the cities and everything, but the planet itself is still there. What we learn next is, in fact, the canon and continuity damaging canon continuity thingamajig that a lot of people hate. And whilst I'm up for the whole Time Lords stealing the regeneration thing from this other race and building their whole legends around that, as well as what Rassilon and Omega did, whilst that makes a lot of sense for the Time Lords and it actually kind of works, what happens next does not. But before we carry on, I just want to say, don't take it as 100% face value. The Master is known for lying, and even if he thinks he's not lying this time round, he could be mistaken, he could have gotten the wrong thing, or everything but one thing is true, and this one last thing, the biggest revelation, is the lie. At time recording, this arc is not finished. There are still lots of answers to be answered in the future. So I'm hoping everybody can keep that in mind before we press forwards. This is not to be taken at 100% face value. Let us wait till the conclusion of this arc before we make an overall final decision. However, current status of where we are at the moment, opinions are valid and completely justified. But let's wait until we get a few more answers before we make a final decision on the story, as the 13th Doctor would say. So, the big universe-changing, canon-breaking thing is the Timeless Child is the Doctor. I'm not going to go into a rant about it because it's not finished, as I've just explained. But if it was finished, I would be ranting about it. This is not good. Never mind the fact that continuity is fucked up. Never mind the fact that the Doctor has just become an all-important character, which a lot of people have been getting tired of recently, and this has put them above an even higher pedestal to say something like Last of the Time Lords or whatever they were trying to do with the 11th Doctor's era. This is making the Doctor even more of the most important person in the universe, as opposed to a traveller who's just trying to help out here and there. And yeah, in the context of the TV show, they are the most important character, they're the lead character, but I can understand why people were getting so upset about them being made to be like this all-powerful god, the most important being that ever existed, etc, etc. Whilst the main point of the show is that this character travels throughout time and space, and they help out when they can, when they arrive at the places they're visiting with their friends, if they're being accompanied by their friends. Sometimes sometimes they aren't. And this story is the complete opposite of that. It's also damaging the mystery of Doctor Who that Andrew Cartmel tried to start up in the late 1980s, and since then we brought back the mystery of Doctor Who after a lot more had been revealed over the 70s and 80s. But the biggest problem with this is we just get told the Doctor is the Timeless Child and we're expected to accept it. Which is why a lot of people are upset, because revelation, Doctor is the Timeless Child, reaction. I'm not sure if the episode was intending to do that, but that's how it comes across. You are the Timeless Child, boom, reaction. No thinking about it. No, you have to think about it. You've got to start thinking about it, because otherwise it won't make sense, and then you get really angry, as opposed to just angry. And that's fine, you can be angry with this revelation if you want. I would rather spend my hours speculating over this than just having a go about it without having many answers. Because like I said, it's when we get those answers is when we'll be able to go into a bit more of a angry rant about it, as opposed to, oh, you're the Timeless Child, see ya situation, where it's just like, oh, got to accept what the Master says is at face value. Yeah, he's going on about, oh, I wish it wasn't true, but it was. But yeah, I don't know. Unless it's 100% confirmed in Series 13 or Series 14 or whenever they decide to answer it, I'm not taking this as face value. I'm not defending it, but I don't want to rap on it just yet, because I want to get some fucking answers first. But I will rap on what's been said so far. Does that sound contradictory? Well, I don't know. I don't fucking care. I'm going to do what I want to do. I want to bash on what's been said so far, but hold off half of it till we get to the end revelation, and then do an even bigger bash when it comes out, unless it actually turns out to have a good resolution. In which case, this would just be the bad start to a arc that ends up maybe being okay. But I'm not expecting it to. Basically, the whole point of this is to just wait and see what the fuck goes on with this thing. But in the meantime, we can have a go at what's been started. Well, sort of, but don't forget to hold off on some of that till we get to the actual revelations. So, yeah, I don't like the Timeless Child reveal, but I'm not going to take it as face value until it's confirmed, because the Master could easily be lying. There's always the possibility that he's making all of this up, or he's being tricked, or everything he says is true, except that it's not the Doctor who's the Timeless Child, that somebody else is the Timeless Child. In fact, a lot of people, including Davis, thought it would be better if the Master was in fact the Timeless Child. And even I've kind of done that in a fan audio. I've made the Master the Timeless Child, and that's why they are really hurt and in pain, and that incarnation is based off the Sacha Dhawan Master. And yet, it would make even more sense. The Master has not only has been lied and tricked to, and we've seen this before, see the end of time, but also he's now the one responsible for creating all of Gallifreyan society, and he's been rejected. And that's even before he went off to be the Master. And he got even more hate for what he tried to do when he was the Master, as we've seen in previous stories. But instead, it's the Doctor because, well, I'm sure we'll get an explanation later down the line. How good it'll be, I don't know. Of course, this could always be a trick to the audience. It could be the Master after all, it could be somebody else, or it could be a complete utter lie. Or maybe it was written to be intended as the Doctor, but they backtrack and change it to something else due to the backlash. In the meantime, this is what we get. Now, it does make a lot of sense that the Master would lose it. We're discovering that the Doctor was the Timeless Child and there's a bit of them inside of him. That makes a lot of sense, and that is what causes him to destroy Gallifrey. But that's the only thing that actually works about this situation, is that the Doctor being the Timeless Child does mean the Master knows there's a bit of them inside of them, and then the goes off to destroy Gallifrey as their reaction. That's the only bit about this that works. The only bit about the Doctor being the Timeless Child. That's the only thing that works at the moment. As mentioned, we'll see how it goes in the future, but in the meantime, the only thing that makes sense is the Master's reaction to finding out. But who knows, perhaps things will be different when we get to Series 13 or Series 14 or whenever we get some answers. We might even have to talk about this story again next year or in 2023 to see where we've come since this story is broadcast in 2020 to the revelations in the future. We'll have to see where that goes. But in the meantime, the foundations of the Timeless Child arc Phase 2 is very shaky, and it brings Phase 1 to a disappointing end, and it's not a good revelation. Only the Master's reaction to what's happening, to what's happening makes sense. And it also brings down this good idea of the Timeless Child influencing Gallifrey and all. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people get pissed about that as well, but you know what? It's continuity changing. It's always going to piss off people. Whatever story, whatever the change of continuity. Believe it or not, the change of making the Time Lords go from big powerful gods to stuffy bureaucrats in The Deadly Assassin pissed off fans back in 1976, and that story's now an all-time classic. TV movie pissed off a lot of people at the time due to the changes of the Doctor being half human and the Eye of Harmony being in the TARDIS, etc. That story has its fans now. And there are a couple of other examples out there. So this story will piss off a lot of people, but at least one thing of what it was trying to do works, theoretically. But with the other one, it doesn't. Unless there's going to be some sort of twist about this twist, believe it or not, a double twist, in the future, or if it turns out to be all be a trick or something, then it's a very bad revelation, and we're off to a bad start of the next phase of this arc. So, these revelations are a massive mixed bag. Gallifreyans getting regeneration energy from somewhere else and developing it and helping to develop their own society, that makes a lot of sense. The Doctor being the Timeless Child, at the very least, if that's how it stays, anyway. I mean, like I said, it could always change. But as it stands with this episode and where we currently are at now. But as the 7th Doctor says in Remembrance of the Daleks, time will tell. It always does. So we'll just have to sit ourselves out and wait for the revelations. And like with the Fugitive Doctor, these are revelations that are too big to ignore. You can have mysteries that can be left as mysteries, but these ones are too big to not have answers to. Speaking of the Fugitive Doctor, she makes her second and currently most recent appearance in this story with a projection of her in The Matrix. The Doctor wonders if she was one of the versions of herself prior to having the memories erased. I kind of go on to a bit more about this in the original review, that theorising that the Doctor had a couple of lives and then they were regenerated back into a child or a baby, or even sperm cell, and then grew up into the first Doctor, played by William Hartnell. And technically they would be the first Doctor, at least in the new set of lives that we're currently in. As for the lives before the first Doctor, well, considering that they erased the memory of the young man, or young boy, we see as one of the incarnations of the Timeless Child, then to me it seems that that incarnation is the one that gets their memories erased, which means they can't really have Ruth or the Morbius Doctors. Oh yeah, this story tries to canonise the Morbius Doctors again after Deadly Assassin tried to uncanonise them. Oh, is that the only reason why this story was written? That's a joke, by the way. I'm sure it wasn't, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was part of it. But the Morbius Doctors and the Ruth Doctor can't be before the first Doctor if this kid got their memories erased and they became a kid again and they grew up into the first Doctor. Unless we have a curator situation where they reuse some old favourite faces. Yeah, considering all of the talk about pre-Hartnell Doctors and everyone getting into a tizzy about that as well, I'm not convinced. I don't think there is many pre-Hartnell Doctors. At the very least, we've got a couple pre-Hartnell Timeless Child incarnations, but the first Doctor is the first Doctor as played by William Hartnell, as well as other actors in other episodes or expanded media. But basically, I think the first Doctor is in fact the first Doctor, and anyone who came before is a Timeless Child incarnation, if this is all true, unless there is some sort of twist about the Timeless Child. But if the Timeless Child is the Doctor, then, unless it's confirmed, I'm sticking with the fact that it's only these couple of incarnations before the first Doctor, because there isn't time to have any more. There's just these few timeless children, but there's no more time to have the Morbius Doctors, no more time for the Fugitive Doctor, there's no more time for anybody else between that kid having their memories erased and the first Doctor. There isn't much time, if what's to be believed is believed. So, honestly, I think the Fugitive Doctor is probably in the future, or an alternative timeline, and the Morbius Doctors are Morbius. But that's speculation at this time. We'll have to wait and see, just like with the whole thing about the Timeless Child. We'll have to see about answers in the future. I hope I've made my position on all of this clear. Put your comments down below. Don't just rat on the whole revelation about it being the Doctor who's the Timeless Child. Actually start putting some ideas into it. Actually try tying it in if you can, or speculating about whether the Master's lying or not, or if he's been tricked or not. Please do not just put, this ruins continuity because XYZ. Put in your ideas about how it can tie into continuity, because just bitching and moaning about how it ruins continuity isn't going to help anybody. Trust me, this episode's been over 14 months, it hasn't helped anybody. Do what the Confused Adipose does. Try theorising about stuff instead of bitching and moaning about it. And if it's a continuity problem, go and watch the Davis Broke Canon video series. It covers all Doctor Who media. Looking at the time now, yeah, this video is going to be a long one. I did warn you. So the end of the episode sees the Doctor prepared to use the organic destroying bomb thing in Ashad and destroy the Masters, Cyber Masters, and end it all before they go off to conquer the universe. Koshamis then turns up to take the Doctor's place and blows it up. The Master escapes, presumably. He says, all of you, this way. So I presume he escaped. I doubt many of the Cyber Masters would have escaped, though. But the organic thing destroys organic life on Gallifrey, which would include the remaining tonal bodies that weren't used for Cybermen, and more of the buildings are destroyed. Whether the planet itself is still there or not, I'm not entirely sure, but certainly more of Gallifrey has been destroyed than it already was. Brilliant! Nice job, Chris! Another Gallifreyan blow up right in our faces! I'm sorry, I'm doing the American accent because I'm sort of quoting Truman Lodge from the film Licence to Kill, with some alterations halfway through. The Doctor sends her companions and the other supporting characters to a TARDIS, and they arrive back in 21st century Earth, where the TARDIS disguises itself as a house, that TARDIS, whilst the Doctor uses another TARDIS to get back to her own TARDIS, and inside this TARDIS, the Judoon somehow get themselves inside and take the Doctor away and lock her up in a prison, which turns out not to be Sharda, which is what we were all speculating at the time. It's alright, it doesn't have to be Sharda. I don't mind it not being Sharda. If they don't want it to be Sharda, that's fine with me. It is, after all, a Judoon prison, not a Time Lord prison, so, yeah, it doesn't have to be Sharda. I'm okay with that. It's not like it was finished thanks to animation and some updated visual effects and new film, especially film sequences, only just over 2 years earlier. No, it's alright, it's alright, it doesn't have to be Sharda. In all seriousness, it doesn't have to be Sharda, but it's disappointing it wasn't. But what's worse is this ending. This ending sucks. The Doctor manages to escape this Gallifrey and the whole organic bomb thing. Yeah, that's fine. Gets back to her TARDIS. Fine. Climax itself isn't amazing, but, you know, fine. That's how you want to end the story? Fine. It's not the worst climax, but it's not the best one either. It's the final scene that is what makes this ending suck. The Doctor just turns up in her the Doctor gets back to her TARDIS, has a moment to think about what she's learnt, and then the Judoon just turn up for no reason, take her away for no reason, and that's our cliffhanger for a subplot in the next episode that ultimately comes to fucking nothing. More on that next time. This is the worst cliffhanger to the end of a series, leading into a special that we have in the new series. It's the same problem that Death in Heaven had. It's ruining an emotional climax, or an exciting climax, with a tie-in to the festive special. And even then, it's not really a very good tie-in. Not to mention the fact that it doesn't really go anywhere in the next episode. As I mentioned, I'll get onto that next time. It's the same problem as Death in Heaven, which in turn was the same problem that Doomsday and Last of the Time Lords had. It's supposed to be a funny moment just after the emotional bits that also ties into the upcoming special. I don't think any of them have done it right so far. I think they've all kind of dropped the ball when it comes to that. The only end of a series that ties in with a special that actually works is The Doctor Falls, as that's the end of the 12th Doctor's story, but he's not prepared to regenerate yet, so he then meets up with a previous incarnation who also doesn't want to regenerate. And that ties in with Twice of the Doctor pretty well, considering what Twice Upon a Time's about, and considering it was also a last-minute change to the end of The Doctor Falls. It was actually done pretty well. So I think that's the only time they've actually managed to do it effectively. I could also say The Waters of Mars, but it doesn't really directly tie into the end of time. The Doctor goes off and does some other adventures in the meantime. But Doomsday, Last of the Time Lords, at the time they were funny, but looking back on it, they weren't the best decisions to make. Glad they cut the one from the end of Journey's End that would have tied into the next Doctor, because that would have been the worst one of the 10th Doctor ones. Death in Heaven, it was a awkward mid-credits scene that really shouldn't have been there. And now here it's just, we've just had this epic climax. We've had this massive continuity-changing reveal. And now the Jejune just turn up in the TARDIS more or less as soon as she's gotten back, basically. Just a few seconds after she gets back, they turn up in the TARDIS, take her away again, and throw her into this prison just so we can have a meandering subplot for the next episode. This ending sucks. And that's basically this story in a nutshell. Ascension of the Cybermen starts off really well. Yeah, it's got its flaws. Yeah, there isn't really much of an end goal for that episode. But it's a pretty decent setup story, apart from the whole Brendan stuff, which is apparently the Master showing these visions, which is apparently Matrix stuff, but hidden and presented as 20th Century Ireland in its place. But the Master said he shows it to the Doctor, but we don't see the Doctor reacting to that in Ascension of the Cybermen. But besides the pointless Brendan stuff and a couple of other nitpicks, and the fact that this episode isn't perfect, Ascension of the Cybermen is a pretty great start to this two-part story. The Timeless Child, on the other hand, drops the ball big time, as it doesn't know whether to be a big Cyberman story, a massive changing of the canon story, or a Master and Ashad story. And it also brings Ashad's story to a bit of a disappointing end when the Master just shrinks him with his tissue eliminator, the compression eliminator, after 2 great episodes of build-up beforehand, and then he's just zapped away by the Master, just so that the Master could do his own thing. And then you can tell that my birds outside are getting all pissed off because they're chirping even louder than usual. Shut up! By the way, I say my birds, I don't own them. They're just the ones who seem to want to hang out on the roof all the fucking time. But, yeah, they don't seem to like this episode either. But the problem with The Timeless Child is that it's doing too many things at once, whilst also delivering a huge, controversial continuity change that nobody will like. The first half of it makes sense with the Time Lord lore, with the whole steam the regeneration of somebody else. That makes a lot of sense for the Time Lords. But the whole stuff about the Doctor being the Timeless Child and having pre-Hartnell Doctors, I really hope this comes to a better conclusion next series, or in series 14, or whenever they decide to finish it, than what we learnt here, because this is a really, really bad end of phase 1 of this arc, which is stuff we've learnt up to this point, and a really bad start to phase 2, which is stuff we're going to be learning after this point. And as I said, the episode's just a fucking mess, not to mention one of the worst endings of a series finale. I'll get on to more about how the prison stuff doesn't work in Revolution of the Daleks when we get to that review. We better get some good answers, Chris, because we haven't taken too kindly to what we've learnt. Even the stuff that does work. If I was to give these episodes individual scores, I would probably give Ascension of the Cybermen a 7 or an 8, kind of leading on the 7, whilst Timeless Children would probably get 4. I would say 3, but again, I'm holding off on Timeless Child 8 until we get the actual answers. Logically, this story sounds like I should give it a 5 or a 6 out of 10 overall, so I'll be giving this story a 5 out of 10. The Timeless Child stuff, episode 10 is very messy and full to bursting with stuff going on, Episode 9 could have had a bit more time to develop some of its stuff if it took out the pointless Brendan stuff. And with the whole continuity changing mess, it really doesn't do this story any favours. Maybe when we get some answers later down the line, this story might be seen in better light. Or maybe it will be seen as the very bad start of what's to come later down the line. As it is right now, it's a very messy story that doesn't know what it wants to be, and ultimately just doesn't work. Whether or not you like the Timeless Child reveal and everything that happens in episode 10, this story as a whole ends up not working overall. I would still put it above Dark Water Death in Heaven, because the Master's Plan actually makes sense in this story, rather than Dark Water Death in Heaven, where it was fucking shit. And it's still much better than fucking Hellbent. It might be weaker than Battle of Ranskoor out of Kolos, though, and I didn't know whether I was going to say that or not before I got to this review, revisitation review, but I think, yeah, this story is probably weaker than the Battle of Ranskoor out of Kolos. So the Series 13 finale needs to be more of a finale than Battle of Ranskoor out of Kolos, but not have as much going on as Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. Okay, Ascension of the Cybermen, not so bad, but Timeless Children, don't be like that. And that basically brings us to the end of Doctor Who Series 12. Thank you so much for watching this revisitation review of Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. That's it from me. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned next time for the revisitation review of the current latest Doctor Who story, Revolution of the Daleks. I'll see you guys then. Goodbye. And remember, don't hate on the Timeless Child stuff too much until we get some answers. But your current opinions are, of course, valid. See you guys next time. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne YouTube channel.